Hello, this is Ben from Drunken Buddha, and today I'm going to be talking about the root solution to workplace suffering. So, I have the impression that for many people, work is a kind of absurd carnival of suffering. There are just so many triggers and so many different ways in which people really find it quite challenging. And so you notice this in the workaholism, people pushing themselves to the point of burnout and exhaustion, or just needing to be working all the time. There's things like perfectionism, where people are trying to, afraid of making mistakes. People often feel like they're not working as hard as their colleagues, or they're not good enough for their role. That's the kind of imposter syndrome side of things, like they don't deserve to be there. There's a lot of just general anxiety about themselves or the work they're doing. A lot of fear about other people, a sense they're going to be judged or not going to be, they're worried. They people please quite a lot. That's something, I think a lot of people identify with, of trying to avoid conflict. They find that very difficult, and so when you're communicating with other people, particularly via email and Slack and things, it's really hard to try and make yourself clear or ask for things, or push to get certain things done. And at the same time, all this stuff's going on, and everyone's hiding it also, or the vast majority of the people, the vast majority of the time, feel that it's not really, they don't really feel comfortable just completely revealing exactly what's going on with them. Often they aren't really aware of what's going on with them as well. And because everyone is doing this, you look at everyone else and it looks like they're all fine. Looks like they're all absolutely fine. And that just perpetuates your own, concerns. You're like, well, what's wrong with me that I have, I feel like this and I feel like this and I feel I have these compulsions to do that. I don't feel good enough. I'm doing something wrong. And I'm very familiar with this. I used to be a nervous wreck at work. This was part of a wider panoply of issues. I used to be addicted to alcohol as my main way of dealing with that, but at work it was pretty extreme as well. Like every time I get an email, like my heart would skip a beat as I was worried, is this going to be some criticism, something I've done wrong? Just very perfectionistic as well, like really, really trying to make sure any piece of work I did was completely invulnerable to criticism, right? Then I was like, okay, well, what if they say this? Like, shit, I better add this to that, right? But in my journey of dealing with that, I've learned a lot about what's actually going on, because companies try and deal with this, and individuals try and deal with it, and they try and provide support for it, but they don't really know what's going on, so it doesn't really cut the mustard. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, right? Going into what the actual root issue is and how you need to address it, and how you can't address it as well, because how people try to address it doesn't really work, which we'll get to. So why is the workplace special around all of this stuff? Well, as I alluded to, while companies say that they want everyone to be open, people still don't actually feel safe to be really open about what's going on with them. And there's a strong sense that you just have to sort of, a good person kind of gets on with a task and just sits there 8 hours a day and just hammers stuff out, right? And that if you're feeling sad, depressed, anxious, all these things, although companies are trying to bring this more into the open, it's not quite there yet, because the words by themselves don't really change much, and there's still a sense that the number one goal is productivity. That's kind of the goal of the workplace. It's being efficient and productive. And if you're not able to meet those standards, or you just have a sense that someone might think that about you, might even just suggest it about you for a moment, your nervous system just clams up, right? And so this is not something you have control over. Your nervous system is hundreds of millions of years old. It goes back, it has its origins in hundreds of millions of years ago, before humans, before the cognitive mind evolved. So if it senses danger, it'll clam up and just hold all of this in. So it's a tricky issue. So what's actually going on here with these different issues? Workaholism, imposter syndrome, perfectionism. Well, you can consider them survival responses. They're adaptations of your nervous system to try to keep you safe. And for that reason, they go very, very deep, and they're very intertwined with your body as well. It's not just a mental issue. So consider it this way. As you go through life, there are certain events that happen to you that feel unsafe, right? And this could be something really big, or it could be something very small, like just being alone by yourself or not knowing what to do, right? And your body creates certain responses to get you to safety, like anger, that's a way of taking control, protecting yourself. Fear, a way of running away or hiding, so you're not vulnerable. Freezing, so you make yourself small, you don't say too much, you don't say anything that could trigger other people in certain ways. Or fawning, that's another response, is similar. You people please to avoid conflict. And these are very natural. But what happens is, in our society, no one's really taught how to deal with them. Parents are often very uncomfortable with them. Teachers, bosses don't know how to handle it and are often very uncomfortable. They try to fix it. They try to say, oh, it'll be fine, don't worry. Or they say, that you're not really allowed to be angry. And what happens with these responses is when they come up, if they're interrupted in that way, if you don't have the capacity to process them, if you can't meet them fully and feel them, for whatever reason, they get interrupted, they get pushed back down. And they don't just disappear, they go into the muscles, into the fascia, into the nerves, but they go into the body in various ways where they're stored as like a potential survival energy, right? Because that loop of anger, say, couldn't complete. Say, there was a threat, anger came up, you had to push it down. That anger is still sitting there in your body, waiting to defend you from that threat. And so as you go through life, you accumulate hundreds of these stuck survival responses that are sitting sitting in the background, looping away, thinking that these threats are still ongoing, even though actually you're just sitting at a desk in the office, right, typing away. In the background, there are these latent survival responses looking out for threats. And it turns out this is incredibly painful, right? That's kind of that background hum of suffering that you experience in your life, that sense of perhaps lack or ennui or just generally not being good enough, like vague dullness, depression, a bit of anxiety, being on the edge of your seat, anything in those kind of directions, that's the result of these stuck survival loops. And that basically means that you have a kind of a chronic sense of unsafety in your body. That, all these things, even though you're presently safe, it's kind of like an echo from the past that's still reverberating into the present. And that is what lies at the root of many mental health issues. And so let me give you like a little model of what's going on, a little three-part model of how to understand these behaviors conceptually, which won't do anything to change them, but it's a good first step. So at the beginning, at the first layer, you have like what you could call the core wound. This is, almost all humans have this, that is built up in childhood because our parents aren't able to perfectly give us what we need, right? They're not able to perfectly let us feel accepted and loved at all times because they're flawed human beings themselves. And so almost everyone has this core sense of being not good enough, being unlovable, being less than, being lacking in some way, right? And that's very, very unconscious. It's very, very deep down. You'd ask someone this in the street, you go, do you feel, do you feel a core sense of unworthiness? That some would say yes, maybe, but often it's like, no, I'm fine. Drinking coffee and just like on the phone, yeah. Then to protect from that, because that's so painful, to protect from that, the body comes up with these survival responses, the fight, the flight, the freeze, the fawn, that come up to protect you. But like I said, these get stuck because we're never really taught or supported to feel them all the way through, to process them fully. Turns out when they're really stuck, there's these hundreds of loops of unsafety in the body. That's what I'm talking about. It's really painful, turns out. And it can be painful on a very unconscious level. You can actually be unaware of the pain you're experiencing, strangely enough, but it can still have an impact on you, and you can see it in your behavior. And that's the third layer. So the second layer is these survival responses, but they get stuck, which is very painful. So you need a third layer of coping behaviors and coping mechanisms to sort of keep all of this stuff packed down, right? To distract you from it, to dissociate from it, to numb out to it in various ways. That's what these kind of like high level behaviors are doing. So workaholism is like getting so absorbed in your work so you don't have to pay any attention. getting stuck on your phone all day or an email all day, right? It distracts you from this latent background sense of suffering. This is also why people just hate being by themselves, like in a room alone. Like, you leave someone in a room alone for an hour, they'll be clawing at the walls within 5 minutes. Why is that? Because there's so much stuff in the body that's just looping, right? And that also going into your head, worrying about all the different things. Like, what are they going to say? And worrying about people are going to judge your work. What are they going to think? And shit, I've got this to do and I've got that meeting to do. What's all this? This is the mind's way of trying to keep all this stuff, the anxiety at bay, right? Going into the head to try and fix things outside. That's where the perfectionism comes in, the imposter syndrome. It's like the mind projects all this stuff that's inside onto the external world and tries to fix it out there. It's like, if I can just make sure that my work is perfect and that everyone loves me and that I do everything absolutely perfectly and I have tons of money and I'm really successful and all my relationships are fine and I never get into conflict with anyone, and then maybe I'll be okay. Like, then I can relax. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that, because there's no way we can live up to that standard. And even if you did, the next day you just have to keep it going, right? I want to say it's really, 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 really important to know that there's nothing wrong with any of this in the slightest. It's all completely innocent, and it comes just from simple lack of awareness, a lack of being supported in your life, right? So there's no judgment here about any of this. It's just like survival responses in animals. You see a gazelle running away from a lion. Like, workaholism or imposter syndrome is physiologically speaking exactly the same process going on. It's kind of, the gazelle's running away from the lion. Humans, when they're being perfectionistic, they're trying to run away from the imaginary lion of being judged, because for humans that social survival is just as important as physical survival, right? So we're getting off on a few tangents here with gazelles and such. Let's bring it back down to a few key points I want to make about how not to deal with this. So you can't think your way out of it, firstly. When these feelings come up, people try and figure out what they can do about it. It's like, all right, shit, I need to go do this, or I need to go do that, or they're going to think this, so I need to make sure my work reflects this, so that they don't think I'm shit. But this is part of the escape. Do you see what I mean? This perpetuates the whole thing. This is that top layer, right? You have the hurt, you have the survival responses, anger, fear, and so on, and you have those behaviors. Thinking about it is one of those behaviors that's trying to distract and numb out from the pain in the body. And so it represents, it's a core part of what keeps this whole loop of suffering going round and round and round without any kind of resolution. And again, nothing wrong with it, completely innocent. It just doesn't work. You'll notice that, as soon as you fix one problem, the next day you just have another problem, and you've just been trying to be perfect every fucking day of your life for decades. And then you have the prospect of needing to be perfect for the next 20, 30 years, right? As a way of maintaining a sense of safety and being all right. And you can do that if you want. You're more than welcome. It's just kind of tiring, maybe. You know what I mean? The second one is you can't succeed your way out. So there's no amount of money you can earn, there's no role you can get, there's no amount of praise you can get that will ever deal with the core issues in the body. Because, again, trying to get that stuff is precisely what keeps the whole thing looping. There's nothing wrong with success in and of itself, but it will never actually address the root issue, which is these trapped, stuck survival responses in the body. Right? So what do you have to do? Well, rather than turning away to the external world, trying to fix things out there, you have to come back in. You have to return to these survival responses that are stuck in the body and discover them and help them to integrate, to complete, to process, to be felt, seen, heard, and so on. So there's no way really around it other than going into and creating an environment where you feel safe to feel the sadness, the shame, the fear, the anger, the hurt, and so on that you've kind of accumulated throughout your life that's underpinning all this stuff. And there's a lot of beliefs that get involved around this, and that's a little more complicated. So I want to say, you do have certain beliefs about yourself, others in the world, that can be helpful to explore as an avenue into this. And this is difficult work, which is why people rarely do it. It's the gut reaction is to run away from all these feelings in the body, but actually there's great relief and great freedom in being in learning the skills and gaining the capacity to turn towards these different parts of yourself that you've had to push away and repress throughout your whole life. And then when you start to integrate that fear, that anxiety, that anger, you'll notice the coping mechanisms at the top start to relax. Because if you no longer have huge amounts of repressed anger in the system, you don't need to lose yourself in work to distract yourself from it. If you don't have that huge amounts of fear in the system, you're not going to worry so much about what other people think and need to be so perfectionistic. If you don't have so much shame in the system, you don't have to, stay quiet in meetings, and you can just say, be more yourself, right? Now, how you do this is a whole other thing. I've got resources on my website, drunkenbuddha.net. This is what I help people to do. It's the process I've gone through myself of turning towards all these parts in myself. The result of which is a lot of these behaviours for me fell away. Like I mentioned, the alcohol at the beginning, that's no longer an issue. Lots of anxiety, no longer an issue. I'm putting myself out there on social media and things. All good. That when you start to work through this, just a lot of the mental just starts to relax. And so this is what I help people do. I work one-on-one with them to guide them through their experience, to integrate a lot of these parts in a safe and compassionate way, because that safety and that compassion, that gentleness is really, really important, because without that, the nervous system just tightens up again, right? It needs to feel safe and secure to start to be able to relax and relinquish some of these coping mechanisms. And in my experience, there's no other way around it, even as there are different methods and approaches for working with the body. That's where it's at. It's about these stuck survival responses in the body. You can't solve it in the mind. You can't solve it in the world with success. You've got to turn within. So if you have any questions, ping me a note. That's all for today, and good luck.